Thank you, Geisha. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Just before I start with the storytelling, a slightly serious point and one in which I require your engagement. Be afraid. Today is International Women's Day. Right now, out there are some incredibly courageous international women who are being trolled to pieces for the work they do. They are under incredible pressure and incredible harassment for doing our kind of work. I'm thinking of people like Maria Ressa in the Philippines, Jessica Aro in Finland, Ferial Hafaji in South Africa. There are international women out there who are taking hell on behalf of all of us here. So if we can all give an enormous round of applause for people like Maria, Jessica. Wonderful. Thank you. And we can clip that, we can send it to them. They know they're not alone. Now, I'm going to be talking about the storytelling. It's Friday morning, the coffee probably hasn't cut in yet, so I'm going to take you on a little murder mystery cruise, okay? To the Black Sea, on that famous cruise ship, the USS Donald Cook. This is the story of the Donald Cook and the flyby of a Russian Su-24 fighter. Now, apparently, the headline of this story is not coming up on the screen. There we go. Russia knocks out America's finest missile cruiser. This is a story which ran in April 2017. And it ran on Russian state TV. Up there, you see? This is Russian state TV. In April 2017, ran the story that an Su-24 did a fly past of the Donald Cook and knocked it out using electronic jamming, nothing else. The source for this story, according to the TV station, was a social media post from a sailor on board the Cook. And listen to what this American sailor had to say. We watched the Russian on our locator until he reached the kill zone to then shoot him down. Technical term. But when he entered the damned zone, mysticism began. Our locators were the first to go out, and then the whole Aegis went out. The pride of our fleet became our shame. Have we got anyone from US NATO here? Anyone recognize it? You can hear the accent of the American sailor saying this, right? It just rings true. So I saw this and I thought, something doesn't quite stack up here. This story seems to have certain holes in it. But the lovely thing is, if you think about that social media post from our American sailor, it's got lovely, unique search terms like Aegis, locator, mysticism, and shame. It's going to be quite hard to find a paragraph which has all those words in it, right? So I thought, okay, it's meant to be a social media post. It's too long for a tweet. Let's start with Facebook. So I stuck those search terms into a Facebook search. And lo and behold, out came a load of posts from 2014. This is when the incident was alleged to have happened. So I then thought, okay, so which is the first post? And I scrolled all the way down, and lo and behold, up came Gimli the dwarf, if you can see Gimli. Scrolling down, I found this paragraph. Maybe a little hard to read, but here we have mysticism, there, locators, Aegis, shame. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is that this is clearly the same story. He's saying, first the locators went out, then the Aegis went out, then the pride of our fleet became our shame. But it's not the same wording as on Russian state TV. It's variations on a theme, which is really odd because clearly Russian state TV was taking this directly from an English language social media post, right? Who thinks they were taking it from an English language social media post? Well done. Right down at the bottom of the story, this is the actual source. It's a byliner. It's a spoof piece. This is a comedy article written by a guy called Dmitry Sidov for the Fund for Strategic Culture in Russia. Drafted in Russian. It's a joke piece about what your funny American sailor might have said if this has really happened, and it's acknowledged as such. And get this, up here. To hell with them, with the money, my dear. Better you buy a small farm in Arizona and grow celery for sale and sing songs in the church on Sundays. Again, hands up if you can hear the American sailor saying that. Okay? But here's the thing. So this is Russian state TV's text. Here's the same paragraph from that Dmitry Sedov spoof piece. And here is the wording, which is absolutely identical, including that rather professionally, state TV actually indicated the ellipses where they'd missed out words. So, remember our story of Russia knocks out the pride of the US fleet? Russian state TV has this for a story. Uses an online fake to lie about a US missile cruiser. That is a story. That is our murder mystery. That is what actually happened here. And I'm telling you this because I'm going to be talking about stories and murder mysteries, and because we're in Belgium, Hercule Poirot, Sherlock Holmes. As Geisha said, I am Ben Nimmo. I'm of the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. I'm on Twitter as Benimo. If anybody is a troll watching this, please spell Benimo with one N in the middle. There's a guy out there with two N's who gets all kinds of abuse that he doesn't deserve. Depending who you listen to, I am the world's greatest Russophobe. I'm a paid propaganda hitman. I'm a neocon warmongering globalist traitor. Or maybe I'm just me. I will leave that for you to decide. The guys who know me already don't do any spoilers, okay? I'm going to talk about storytelling, fact-checking, and our kind of job. Because as I see it, the challenge we're facing should actually be summed up as a question. Are we facing information warfare, or are we facing narrative warfare? Is the problem that the hostile actors out there have better information than us? I would argue that it's got nothing to do with information. It's all about stories. We, the fact-checkers, the open-source community, the journalists here in the room, have the facts. But what the hostile actors have is the stories. And it's much easier to tell a story when you are not bound by the facts. And that means that when we are thinking about how this works, we need to remember that the hostile actors, the troll campaigns, they speak to fear and anger, and they seek to disempower people. They try to make you so angry and so scared that you stop thinking. And once you stop thinking, they've got you. We, in the open source community, have to speak to interest and curiosity. And I mean interest in the sense of, hey, that's interesting, not in the sense of self-interest. And we have to seek to empower people. It's not enough to do the fact-checking. We have to do the storytelling. But the great thing is that there is a model for this, and it's called the detective novel. You think of Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, you think of Agatha Christie, think of an Hercule Poirot novel, right? Since we're in Belgium. At the end of the penultimate chapter, Hercule Poirot says, this is who did it. And you immediately skip the page because you want to see how. What was the trick? How come you didn't spot it when Agatha Christie did? And there's a really interesting quote from another crime writer, an English lady called Gladys Mitchell. A problem has been set before him, and the reader obtains pleasure from doing his best to solve it. But every clue must be placed fairly before the reader. Now that is how you not only get the facts across to the reader, but you engage them, you bring them along on the story. And if you think about the final scene on Murder on the Orient Express, we've just had the bit where Hercule Poirot says, it was everyone who done it. We already know who's done it. He's told us that at the end of the preceding chapter. We already know why they did it. We find that out kind of halfway through the book, generally. Why is the last chapter so interesting? Why is that the one you read through if you're a teenager like I was? Why do you flip forward to that one halfway through? Because it's so exciting. You want to know the how. You want to see how the trick was done. That's what grabs. That's what engages. And if you think of the kind of research which has had impact and which has worked, it's sharing the how. It's taking the reader on the journey. It's not just saying, we have checked this fact and it is incorrect. It's telling the story. So I'm going to give a couple of storytelling examples, because it's still only Friday morning. Okay, so just before the German election in 2017, a colleague and I were monitoring the online space, and we saw this advert by the AfD. The caption is, do you remember New Year's Eve? It's a reference to the sex attacks on New Year's Eve 2016. But we looked at this image and we thought, something doesn't look right here. And if you look at the shadow there and the lighting on her forehead, you compare it with the lights and the shadows on the guys behind, that doesn't look right. Either she's got a lamp about here or somebody's photoshopped that. So we thought, okay, if it's a Photoshop, let's reverse search it and see what happens. Straight off, we found this. Look, compare the faces. This is clearly the same background shot with a different headshot imposed. We had our fact at that point. The AfD was using an image which had been photoshopped. You've got the proof right there. But that's not the story. To have the story, you have to have the how. In this case, we thought, well, one of the houses, well, where did they get the head from? Whose head is that? Where did they get the background from? Well, the background is Lara Logan on Tahrir Square in Cairo in 2011. So what's meant to be New Year 2016 in Cologne, wrong country, wrong continent, wrong year. That's part of the story already. Then the question is, well, where did they get the head from? And so my colleague thought, what's the best way to do? You bring the reader along. We crowdsourced it. We tweeted out, can anybody help us identify this glamorous blonde? Clearly out there are online experts in glamorous blondes. Because within about an hour, somebody sent us the URL. Yep, that's where it's from. Scroll down, 7 shots down. So we looked for that, and we found this image. It's a perfect match, right? Only when we reverse searched that to find the ultimate source, we couldn't find it until we flipped it. And when you reverse search that image, what you get is the front cover of the Spanish edition of For Him magazine for gentlemen, featuring an English glamour model called Danica Thrall. Okay? Now that's where you have the story, because then you can take the reader through every step of the chain. It's like, so you have a far-right party which is pushing out anti-migrant messaging, and they're ripping off the front cover of a Spanish glamour magazine to do it. That's a really interesting story. You take the reader along, you get them involved. The reader's helping you. Now, part of the technique of bringing the reader along is you can actually teach them the skills in advance. You can actually give them really simple principles, because then they'll get the fun of next time it's them who's being Sherlock Holmes, it's them who's being Hercule Poirot. And there are certain tricks that I use. I'll bring out just a couple of them here. One is for spotting bots. Tell people to look for the 3 A's. You're looking for activity, anonymity, and amplification. 3 A's. I always love little simple linguistic patterns like that. What you're looking for, here's an account that I picked up on the other day. This was tweeting in India ahead of the election there. We've got an account where if you look at its activity, you won't be able to read that, but this account posted 2,453 posts in one day. You do the maths on that, you work out that's 1 tweet every 40 seconds from midnight through to midnight. I put it to you that that is a level of activity which would be unlikely to see in a human user. Okay, so we have activity. I ran it through a platform called Twitonomy, which scans all the posts, up to about 3,000 posts it's done recently. Of those, 98% were retweets. So not only is this a hyperactive user, but they don't actually have their own voice. They're just amplifying other people. 98% of 3,200. That's well over 2,900 posts. Just retweets. Somebody doesn't have much of a life. And in fact, they don't have any life, because if you looked at their profile picture, there was no verifiable personal information at all. All you have is a cartoon picture, a generic political background. The thing is, you can teach people the tricks like this. You don't need particularly special equipment to do it. You just need patience. And I have actually taught this to a school of 10-year-olds, and they've got it. And I will still see some of the kids from the class, and they say, hey, I found another bot the other day. I looked for the 3 A's. You're bringing the people along with you. You're getting them to share the skills. And once they've got the skills, then they've always got them, and they start telling their friends. They actually go home and do it for fun. This stuff is cool. Being Hercule Poirot is cool. When you're sharing the how, you're giving them tools. Another one which I actually developed just after I left Brussels in 2014, what I think of as the 4 Ds of Russian disinformation, because so often when the Kremlin comes under criticism, it will react in an absolutely standard template. And the 4 Ds are dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. Dismiss, they will insult the critic. For example, when Theresa May stood up in Parliament and accused the Russian secret services of trying to assassinate Sergei Skripal a year ago, the Kremlin said, oh, that's just a circus. My favorite example of all time, in September 2017, Morgan Freeman, the actor, fronted a video saying that Russia had attacked the US and interfered in the election. The Russian embassy in South Africa posted a tweet which said, Morgan Freeman says Russia attacked America. Morgan Freeman also says he's addicted to marijuana. Is it even worth listening? And it's that, is it even worth listening, is the core of it. Don't listen to them. Don't look at their evidence, because they're the world's greatest Russophobe. So that's dismiss. Distortion is simply presenting a twisted view of the facts. So when the Russian Ministry of Defense posted photoshopped images to try and blame Ukraine for shooting down MH17, that's distortion. Distraction is the old whataboutism. Well, you're accusing us of that, so we're going to accuse you of the same thing. or else, as in the Salisbury case, we're just going to float 31 different narratives about what might have happened, so you drown in this fog of confusion. And then dismaying tactic is, oh my God, the world's going to come to an end. Now, I developed this as an analytical tool, but it's also a predictive tool. You can use this to say what the Kremlin is going to come out with next. And you can even play bingo with this. I have done this. I have taught this to a couple of senior officers from a country which I will not name. And they've actually told me they've sat through briefings with their Russian counterpart, ticking off the Ds as they came out, and it really winds up their counterpart. But it works. It's a predictive tool, and you can also use it as a little red flag. So if you look for cases where you know the 4Ds have been deployed, you know that the pattern works, when you see them being deployed again, that's when you want to start thinking, okay, there's probably disinformation going on here. So I'll pick just one example before I finish. The INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. There's a lot of back and forth about this at the moment. And I found one particular statement by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister made at the end of last year. Just in the first few paragraphs, here are some of the comments he came with aimed at the US. Dishonest interpretations, clearly false information, propaganda campaign, brazenly, traditional trick, fabricated charges, divorced from the facts, and unscrupulous attempts to create a false impression. That was all in about the first 4 paragraphs. You look at that and you think that reads awfully like an attempt to dismiss before you've got onto the substance, doesn't it? That's a little red flag that maybe you need to be looking for more disinformation there. That's D1, dismiss. A separate Foreign Ministry press statement made this hilarious comment. There's an interesting commonality with the notorious claims about Russian meddling in the US elections, since they provide no real evidence. No real evidence. 9 million tweets, tens of thousands of Instagram and Facebook posts, 2 million indictments, Russian journalists who've been into the troll farm, trolls who've come out admitted. All that gets written off as no real evidence. That's a distortion. And if you see them distorting the basis of their entire argument, you need to start looking for distortions somewhere else. Again, it's a red flag. Distraction. So the US accuses Russia of violating the INF using one particular missile system, which apparently has a range of over 500 kilometers. Let's hear what the Russian side then says they want to talk about. Well, let's talk about drones, because they must be violating the treaty as well. Let's talk about target missiles for tests, because they must be in violation as well. Let's talk about missile defense sites, because they might be in violation as well. Distraction, distraction, distraction. If you start talking about drones, then you're not talking about the subject you're actually trying to focus on. This is exactly the kind of distraction technique we see. And once you see it, you can start digging deeper and looking what else you find. And then the final one, the dismaying tactic. Again, from that initial press conference I mentioned, it'll lead to disastrous consequences, dramatically growing risks, entire regions sliding into an arms race. The growth of dangerous tensions in the world will become inevitable. The world's going to end. That's the dismaying technique in action. So on one subject, the INF Treaty, just looking at a couple of press conferences, suddenly you're seeing the pattern. There's all 4 Ds there. So that's when you start looking for more. You think, okay, this is ringing all the alarm bells we've got. Somebody is playing a game here, and that game is about raising a terrifying narrative, not actually about saying what the facts are. So by teaching people to spot those traits, you can then alert them to look out for these kind of issues yourself. And if you think back to Hercule Poirot and that final chapter, all of us want to be as clever as Poirot, right? But we don't quite have the insight, we don't quite have the techniques. But what we are trying to do is empower the reader. You can teach them the tricks. They're not that complicated, not all of them. You teach them the skills they need. You teach them the attitude. And you let them solve the puzzles. And by doing that, suddenly what you're engaging is their emotion, but it's not the emotion of hatred or fear or anger. It's the emotion of, hey, that's really interesting. I can be Hercule Poirot as well. There's that intellectual challenge of actually solving the problem. And once you have the problem-solving brain kicking in, it's much harder for anybody else to manipulate the emotions. And the other benefit is if you can teach one person to do this, you're going to make them more resilient against disinformation, but you're going to make our whole community that much bigger and that much stronger and that much more robust as well. So the more we can think like Hercule Poirot, the more we can get into that final chapter of the book, the greater chance we will have of actually not just dealing with information warfare, but of dealing with narrative warfare, which is a much, much more dangerous threat. And I will stop there. So thank you very much.